In this lecture, we're going to be continuing developmental theory, so this is part 2 out of 2. So in this one, we'll get into more of our theories related to social cognitive development, social cultural theories, and some other areas. So stay tuned. On this slide, we're just reviewing from part 1. We talked about classical conditioning and operant conditioning, and so make sure that you refer back to theories lecture part 1, and then we're going to talk now in this lecture a bit more on social learning theories. So for our social learning theory, Albert Bandura proposed basically this interaction between the environment, ourselves, and our behaviors, and so emphasized that people have interactions with their environment, and the environment influences us, and we influence the environment, and it's a multi-dimensional approach. And so there's different elements within our environment, how we observe, how we take in information, that have an everlasting cycle of interaction. And so we see that within behaviorism, which we talked about in theories part 1, that there were often influences on behavior. And so we had different kinds of reinforcements, positive and negative. And so this extends that idea of behaviorism, but specifically we're looking at how other people influence our behaviors, and also our environment influences our behavior. So it's not just different aspects of behavior that are reinforced or punished, it's also the element that there are not necessarily reinforcements needed in order for our behaviors to change. Sometimes it's just the interactions within our environment that create changes within our behavior. And so this can happen through observation. And so I may notice another peer. If I'm in a classroom with a bunch of other children and I'm a preschooler, I may notice and observe that someone goes over and bites another child. And then maybe I go over and I test out that theory to see what would happen if I bite somebody. So I'm doing this through an observational standpoint. So hence why this is a social learning theory. So we're learning through our social environment. So we don't have to have someone specifically tell us that if you use your teeth and press down on another individual, this is what biting is, and this is the result of what happens. But we are basically seen through modeling. We show individuals and teach them through a perspective of modeling, and we observe our environment and things that happen within our environment, and we try them out for ourselves. And so there's a couple videos here that you might want to explore related to social learning theory, and so I encourage you to check those out. Now, Jean Piaget, he talked about our cognitive theory of development, and he was also a stage theorist. So just like Erikson, we also see that Piaget looked at stages of development, specifically diving into cognitive perspectives. So again, thinking about thinking, problem solving, questioning everything that we need to know about our mental operations and what we are doing, saying, feeling, thinking. All of that comes down to what happens over time with that. So he has different stages that we can look at from birth through adolescence and adulthood, and thinking about the different beliefs and assumptions that we may have. And so you'll see that there's different periods within this time frame. So sensory motor period is our infants and toddlers, and so this is more connected to sensory input and our motor abilities. So different kinds of sensory stimuli, listening, feeling, touching, putting things in our mouths, object permanence, recognizing that objects are still there even when they disappear or are hidden. And then we get into pre-operational stage, concrete operational, formal operational. So your text talks about them in a bit more detail. And when we get into our lectures, specifically touching on infants, toddlers, preschoolers, and so forth, as we get through adolescence, we will revisit Piaget's stages of cognitive development. And so we will look at each perspective of his stages once we get into that age bracket. Some other things that Jean Piaget proposed were the ideas that we adapt and assimilate and accommodate to our environment. And so again, this is connected to social learning and how we're interacting with our environment, how our environment interacts with us. And so when we're thinking about cognitive perspectives, we're thinking about how we construct knowledge. So constructivism is how we build our knowledge and how we adapt to our environment and basically build a repertoire of things that we know and questions that we might have about the world. And so with adaptation, These are interactions with people and objects, and so we're manipulating and interacting in order to kind of figure out the world. And so this starts from the moment that we're born, and it doesn't just stop after we get out of infancy and toddlerhood. We are constantly adapting to our environment, having new interactions with new people, being presented with new kinds of stimuli within our environment, and we're manipulating and trying different things out. Hence why, as we increase the kinds of challenges that we're presented with within a school setting or a work setting, or even within our romantic relationships as we get into adolescence, we're proposed with different ways that we must interact, and we adapt based on those changes and those challenges that are presented to us. We also see that assimilation and accommodation are key pieces here within our cognitive understanding of the world. And so as we're adapting to the environment, we're adding in new information to existing concepts. And so I gave just an example here. For example, we'll pick animals, right? And I included a little imagery here that you may use to kind of support that. So a child may call a butterfly a birdie because they know that they can see that butterflies fly and birds fly. However, they've never been presented with a butterfly before. They only know that birds fly, and so they categorize butterflies within the same idea. They assimilate that both butterflies and birds are the same thing because they both fly, they're both in the sky, maybe they both have bright colors. And so I'm adding new information into an existing concept, and I'm trying to then figure out how this information fits with what I already know about the world. But then what happens when we have interactions with our environment further, also the influence of adults and additional knowledge added in, we can accommodate what we previously thought and restructure this concept. And so using that same example of a child calling a butterfly a bird, I may create a new schema, which is how we categorize our information. Kind of think about it like file folders in our head or different boxes where we categorize information. And so we may then create a new schema or box for information. And so I have a category of things that fly, I have a category for birds, and now I have a category for butterflies. And so both of those examples, butterflies and birds, fit into a flying category. However, they have separate categories of different kinds of animals that they are. And so although butterflies fly, they're not birds. And now I have new knowledge of that based on things that are presented to me with my experiences. So it could be that I have a parent say, actually, yes, I noticed that they both fly. However, butterflies are different than birds, and here's why. And so we might then talk about how they're actually insects and what they do and what they eat. And so I'm adding new information all the time into my world, and I'm accommodating. And so all of this is part of constructivism and the way that we are using our brains to think and ask questions and construct our knowledge. So that's a little bit more about Jean Piaget and some of the aspects of cognitive development that he proposed. So next, we're going to talk a little bit about Lev Vygotsky, and he was a social cultural theoretical perspectivist, and he proposed that we have a dynamic process, that we're constantly interacting with our society around us, and that we are focusing on integral development of who we are in terms of what we can currently do and what we can do with or without supports. And so we use often this kind of visual representative image of the circular elements of our zone of proximal development. And so the center of that zone is what we can do without any assistance, just by myself. These are the tasks that I'm able to accomplish. And as we start to widespread on that zone, we're noticing that I can still do tasks within that green area or that second tier. However, I need some assistance with these things. So maybe, for example, riding a bike. There's a lot of different steps in being able to ride a bike, and I have a interaction with other individuals within my environment in order to kind of help me to get to that full bike riding ability. And so maybe without assistance, I'm able to put on my helmet and I'm able to get onto my bike and I'm able to start moving the pedals. However, unless I have assistance from my caregiver, I am not able to get from point A to point B on my bike without falling over. or I need the assistance of training wheels in order to be able to accomplish getting from point A to point B on my bike. And then if I'm getting into that last zone of proximal development, maybe this is something I cannot do even with assistance. And so even though I might have support from my caregiver with my bike riding, as well as the training wheels, maybe I'm struggling and I'm not able to even go over a rocky path because I'm not able to even get from point A to point B without assistance. And so going over a rocky path or even going up and down a hill, that's just not something I can do quite yet. And that could be that I need more time to practice, I need additional support set in place, or I might not even get to that point because maybe developmentally I don't have the strength to be able to do that, or I don't have the understanding of how to move the pedals quite yet. And so there's different ways that we can kind of look at that zone. And really what this is thinking about modifying and providing support set in place. And so we often use this theory as a way to better provide guidance to children with things that they need to know about the world, or to help them to understand the different steps to tasks, creating different accommodations or modifications for children in order for them to accomplish different goals. We also may look at human beings and children from a humanism perspective. And so Abraham Maslow came up with a triangular tiered pyramid in looking at different stressors and the potential for human beings' needs. And so at the bottom base level of our foundational pyramid, we see that the first need that humans desire and need is our physiological needs. And so those are our basic needs. And basically the way that this kind of tier works is that we have to start with the foundational aspect of physiological needs in order to move up to accomplish different kinds of hierarchies. And so this hierarchy of needs, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, basically indicates that if we do not reach the foundational level, we cannot continue to move up. And so we have to be able to stand firmly on one level in order to then reach the next one. And so that's why the top tier here of self-actualization is the most difficult to accomplish in terms of having all the other areas met. And so let's just consider physiological needs. If we have students who are within a classroom setting who are in poverty and they don't have access to food, water, shelter, clothing, then it's going to be a lot harder for them to have social and emotional regulation skills, to build friendships, which are in our love and belonging and self-esteem needs, because their physiological needs are not met. Even their safety needs, that second tier, feeling safe, secure in the classroom setting, that cannot happen unless those basic needs of human beings are met. And so this theory is a great one to recognize that we all have different levels of needs, and so we have to consider all aspects of needs for our learners, and we also need to consider a wide range of diverse elements that may be impacting our ability to reach these needs. And so again, this could be the aspect of poverty, this could be the element of interactions between our caregivers. This could be that we don't have enough resources within our environment, our community. This could be that we don't have a great connection between home and school. So there are many things that may impact us. We may have students who are coming from, again, impoverished neighborhoods, or they're from minority groups who are not afforded the same amount of resources. So they systemically are not able to reach higher levels of actualization within this pyramid because our society has presented many different challenges that limit them from being able to have their safety needs met and things like that. So this is what Abraham Maslow proposed. All right, so let's talk about Urie Bronfenbrenner and the ecological systems theory model. And this is one that I truly enjoy talking about. And if and when you take I'm trying to remember the course number. It just left my brain. I was thinking CD100, but that's us right here. But if and when, or if you've already taken Child, Family, and Community, our CD 106, you will be basically exploring ecological systems theory in great detail, because this theory explores all factors of our environment and how they influence children over our entire lifespan. So from the moment that we are born, or actually from the moment we are conceived to the time that we die, our environment impacts us. And so Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory explores different elements within our environment and how we are impacted by this. And so it gets more complex over different points within our lives, depending on what kinds of factors in the environment we're being influenced by. However, the different kinds of systems that influence each one of us, they are in general brackets. So you'll see here that this is another circular visual representative that has layers to it. And so if we're putting the child, or even put yourself in the middle, because we are all influenced by our environment, we see that it's complex, and that our microsystems are our immediate environments, which is like our family, our school, our friends, peers. Those are the people that impact us immediately. And so this could be our attachment to our caregivers. This could be our schools and whether or not we are able to attend high quality schools. And then we see that as we move through the different levels, our mesosystems are the connections between our microsystems. So that home to school connection, do my parents and my teachers have a good relationship? And if they do or they don't, this impacts my ability to do well in school. And we also have exosystem, macrosystem, and chronosystem. And so our exosystem is our indirect environment. So this would be something like if we have parents and their work. So I'm not directly influenced by my parents' job. However, if my parent gets laid off, for example, this may then cause me to have to downsize and move into a different home. This also might mean that we have to move into a different community and move schools. And so I'm indirectly influenced by that element of the environment. We also see that social and cultural values and aspects of our society influence us. So religious elements, as well as different societal perspectives and expectations within our society. So this could be gender roles, this could be roles within our religious group or practice, all different aspects of the macro system. And then chronosystem is changes over time. So this could be things like war. This could be things like significant movements. This could also be more micro and immediate environment changes. So maybe we had a death in the family. That's a change over time. So maybe, from the moment that I started preschool all the way until late elementary school, I hadn't had a death in the family. And then a significant person within my life passed away. This could be a big shift in my system and in my development, and have that change over time impact me. And so I've also included another video to explore this theory. And so again, this is just looking into how our environment influences us in many different regards. So evolutionary theories, you may have heard of Charles Darwin. He's an evolutionary theorist. Really just look at our survival and reproduction rates over time and how selective adaptation, so again, how we're adapting to our environment and how we fit our behaviors within that environment. So for example, over time we've adapted to our sun's radiation by wearing sunscreen and having protective clothing. And so that's a change in our behavior to fit in with the environment. Same with, the production of sunroofs, as well as the production of umbrellas. Those are all things that we have done to change and adapt over time in order to protect ourselves from the sun. And also we see that genes enhance survival and reproductive ability. And so over time, our genetics can be influenced. And so we talked a little bit about epigenetics, and there was the theory that I discussed in the first slide about epigenetics. And so that's something that you may want to check out if, again, you're interested in that element of how our genes influence our adaptation over time. And so this is just a little link to go into a little bit more about the theory of evolution, a little bit about Charles Darwin. So I encourage you to check that out if you need to know more. On this slide, this one is pretty self-explanatory, but just so that you have knowledge of different contributions of the following theories that we have discussed. And so this covers both theories part 1 and theories part 2. And this is all that we have for our theories lectures. So make sure that you are listening to and reviewing both part 1 and part 2 to have the entire collection within this section for theories.